Thank you for this. Sorry
Thank you.
about the difficulties.
No
Sorry about the
problem.
connection difficulties.
No problem. Okay, let's proceed to the next session on metro environment. This is a very interesting topic as well. Of course, Gabriel, are you there? Can you hear me? Gabriel?
Yes, I'm here. I'm here, Mark. How
Hello,
are you?
Gabriel. Okay. Hello, how are you? So let me introduce you first. So I'm happy to see you. So Gabriel is our this next distinguished presenter and speaker. He is an experienced international consultant crossing multilateral sector, academia, and government. So he introduced the Metropolitan Discipline in Massachusetts Institute of Technology in 2016, so forming the first group and network of metropolitan academic knowledge discipline. Pedro mentioned that you were the one who initiated or started the World Metropolitan Day, so that's what really is the most interesting for me, because the entire session of this, the reason why we're putting this together is really in celebration of World Metropolitan Day, and this is the first of many of the IM Congress. And welcome, Gabriel, and looking forward to hearing from you. Yeah, the screen is yours, Gabriel.
Thank you so much, Mark, and thank you to the whole fellow community that is here together. The idea is to spend, how many time do we have, Mark, so I can organize well the timing?
So you can share, you can have 20 minutes and then we can have 10 minutes of Q&A. But we can extend, of course, as needed.
Okay, great. Try to share my, I don't know what. Okay. So I will share this presentation with you. I wanted to, metropolitanism, as we discussed it with Pedro and Antonella and other friends years ago, it's a discipline of practice. It's a discipline that is shaping itself. So my idea is to share with you some experiences I had during the Buenos Aires Urban Environmental Plan, which is not a metropolitan plan, but it includes a whole line of work around metropolitan issues, trying to help this metropolitan planning develop, right? So it's not specifically about metropolitan environment what I want to talk, because in that case I should only speak about like theoretically, and well, basically we will see a little bit of both, right? I'm taking my time in order to make 20 minutes. Let's go. First of all, you know that we're going through a very particular epochal paradox. We are talking a lot about smart cities, and we will reflect a little bit about that and technology. I think the previous conversation was also about that. And particularly in a moment of increasing inequality and the pandemic, I think it didn't help at all with this. And also in time of very much uncertainty. So we have on the one hand, a lot of technology, data, connectivity, teleworking, and well, these sorts of meetings around the world that we can do. But at the same time, we have a lot of uncertainty about COVID and also about climate change. The idea that the climate might affect us heavily, I don't have time to enter in every one of these different scenarios, but you can see how the EPCC is working on those, and they have been presented very recently. This is a little bit older, but they have been presented many more of than that recently, and also with the scenarios that we have about decarbonization, how much we need to make our cities neutral in carbon, considering that the tendency is terrible, no? If we don't act soon. So how can we do that? And how important this is, that it's a matter considered not only at the city level, but at the metropolitan level. It doesn't make any sense that, for example, Buenos Aires metropolitan area is 15 million inhabitants. Buenos Aires city, it has presented its second plan, climate action plan last June. But if the whole metropolitan area doesn't develop a real climate action plan, it's not going to really work out well, right? So what's being smart? Well, here are some definitions that I have of how important is to develop a smart ecosystem in order to create the capacity to react towards these challenges, including the environmental one. So here you can see in this decalogue, I can say, of 10 different definitions. I won't go through them. You can read them while I speak. They emphasize the importance of measuring, prototyping, co-creating, analyzing the data, creating data. So how important it is to work together to understand the talents and go for that. And also how important it is to have values under a plan, and how to not just values in the sense of a vision or just let's say a name. Is how you build a consensus, how you build social capital through planning, right? So the real smart city is the one that develops a smart ecosystem, an ecosystem of actors that are capable to create something and defend a plan, and also start changing. We need to start a huge change, a very radical change in terms of how we use the city, how we move in the city, and how we plan the city. And so we have to jump from product-oriented outcomes towards process-oriented results, right? You can see here, for example, how planning was conceived more than almost 200 years ago. Very important cities, no, as Barcelona, or planners as Ildefonso Cerdá. And today we plan in a different way. We plan sitting around papers, discussing, creating arrangements. It's another way. It's a bottom-up, but not only. No, we need both directions at the metropolitan scale. So what I am very interested in is in action, what I call action-based planning, because I learned that the only way to create consensus and to foster governance in the metropolitan scale is when you develop a project in common, when you are able to co-create with the different sectors, but also with the different levels of governments, with the different jurisdictions. And it's very difficult to create something together if we only talk about abstract issues. We need to go to projects, and thanks to projects, create that smart ecosystem that I explained before. This is an example of what the city of Buenos Aires did with one park that was, actually it was an abandoned lot. So thanks to these sorts of methods that in Buenos Aires, we call them urban anthropology, we managed to create a park. This is not part of the urban environmental plan, was previous, but it's an example of the sort of actions I'm talking about. So I've been talking a lot about all this in international conferences at MIT and also at the University of Buenos Aires, where I launched the, maybe you heard about the program on metropolitan urbanism. It's the first program of its type in Latin America, and since the pandemic it became digital, so anyone who's speaking Spanish can make the course. And I've been developing these ideas also in CPEC, which is a think tank that allowed me to work with different cities in my country. But the concept of action-based planning plus plus planning to help me get to this idea of what I call in Spanish planificación, which is plan and action together. How can we start those two processes at the same time? So in the next 10 minutes, I would like to tell you a little bit more about this method that I think can be very useful for any city, especially for those cities and for those sorts of processes that need some boost on social capital, where confidence, where trust, where consensus is not something that it's given. So you have to develop that. And for metropolitan planning, this is key, because that's the case for metropolitan planning. So basically, what are the characteristics of this method that I managed to implement together with the whole Metropolitan Planning Council of the Buenos Aires city government? It is characterized by that integrates participations from the very beginning, not only during the process. Since almost the first day, we call the different actors and we start to work with them together. That's why it is a co-creative process. Secondly, it's an open process. It means anybody can jump in and out in any part of the process. It's not that if you are not in the beginning, you cannot participate. The core of the plan can be the method, no, but the core of the concepts can be changed in any moment of the process. Because it's a process that is looking for consensus in order to face these environmental challenges. It takes into account multi-scalar, and you will see now in the next slide how the different scales are framed, and also multi-sectors. It's like a sort of plan method that you can enter to the plan by different doors, let's call it like that. It makes a really quick diagnosis based not only in data, but also in perception. And it builds an ecosystem of actors by prototyping and co-creating these strategic projects that I mentioned. So as you can see, it helps also the development of leadership in metropolitan issues, for example, as you will see in the next slide. And it promotes the generation of governance mechanisms during the process. These are some of the characteristics of the planning. In a traditional planning process, we go from diagnosis to process by creating a vision, a strategy, and programs in the middle. In planification, we do like a little hack to the system. In order to go directly from the diagnosis, we jump to a couple of projects that we can create together, and then we go back to the vision, the strategy, and the programs. This little hack in the system allows us to create confidence, trust, social capital, and to get to the moment of the vision creation with less resistance from the different actors. So I would like to tell you a little bit about Buenos Aires then, what we are doing, because the plan is ongoing, no? We are developing right now. I think you know what Buenos Aires is, but just for those that are not very in touch with our region, Buenos Aires, it's located in Argentina, in the bank of the River Plate or Rio de la Plata. It's a river that gets to the sea, a very wide river, 60-kilometer wide river. The other side is Uruguay. It's a 3 million inhabitant city within a 15 million or almost 16 million inhabitant metro region. And it concentrates about 50% of the Argentine product. And well, here are some images, Buenos Aires and its relationship with the port and with the new neighborhoods, the old town. It's a city of contrasts, like huge parks and a lot of, let's say, European influence, but also with growing inequality in many cases, with many neighborhoods that are totally informal. So we have to deal with that and improve that, and of course change it. The city of passion, of colors, of movement, of culture, is a cultural capital of. So the plan, it has it's a particular plan because it's a very important law, the law of, that give frames to the to the territorial decisions of the city, and in this slide I would like to develop the method and try to be as clear as possible so you can understand all these different aspects that I mentioned before. So when we had to frame the plan for the city, what we said is we are going to work in 3 different axes, all of them at the same time. So this is one part of the difficulty. On the one side, we want to develop a CENI plan, a strategic agenda. To do that, we work with the NGOs by creating, by working with a specific area of the government that it's already working with more than 210 very important organizations. The most significant organizations of the city are there. So we really work with them in different sessions to get to that strategic agenda. On the other hand, we want to work at 2 different scales. The neighborhood scale with this idea of the city of proximity. So this would be the first time that Buenos Aires will have a plan for every single commune that we have. That will allow us to think at that scale, but also we are working at the metropolitan scale by thinking different sectorial strategies related to basin management, related to waste management, mobility, that we are seeing the systems at that scale. But the interesting issue here is that instead of doing it from the executive government, we are working with the Congress of the city and the Congress of the 40 municipalities that are around the city. Because this allows the participation of those who are voting the laws that normally they get to this discussion too late. So it really made a very interesting difference, the fact that they were participating since the beginning, and they could help us shape that, can we call it, metropolitan agenda, and also understand how important it is to develop the framework, the law that will allow these different municipalities work together. So I have to say that these were great achievements of this process. Here are some images. We have to use all this technology, digital technology, since due to the pandemic. So we could work in more than 1,000 proposals, for example, for the district plan, more than 1,800 participants along the process. This is an opportunity also that technology is giving us, that it allows us to open the processes, leave them there, so people that could not assist to the meeting could see it later at home. This is something interesting. Finally, well, we are working on principles and guidelines. I don't have time now to develop, but of course, one of those principles is related to the environmental quality. And in that case, we want cities that are more make it more walkable, to create super blocks in many areas of the city in order to diminish the amount of cars and increment the amount of public space, and also make the city more friendly and lower in carbon emission. So it's a lot of different policies that will allow us to get this urban environmental plan to the next level. But another interesting aspect is that we are developing a very detailed number of indicators in order to measure the success of a plan year by year. So in order to end and make it within the time that I have, I want to tell you this short little nice story about the Metropolitan Day that Roland asked me. I added during the previous presentation in order to share it with you. Some years ago, in 2017, I was participating in a sort of hackathon of ideas organized by the Inter-American Development Bank in La Plata, in Argentina. Well, we were like, was a small contest of idea, and in my table, we were competing with other very important people, I would say, from the metropolitan perspective in Argentina. And well, my idea was to get the mayors of the city together at least once a year. So in order to do that, I proposed the creation of a Metropolitan Day that should be an international celebration that could create the consciousness of how important it is to make mayors of the same metropolitan area work together. The funny thing is that my idea didn't win that day. I got the second place, I guess, but I didn't quit. I didn't quit, and so I started to push and propose it in different places and with a different network. So the idea of the smart ecosystem, it worked here. So here you see the first celebration of the Metropolitan Day that wasn't yet a UN official day. That's why, thanks to the collaboration of Rafael Forero, we got the new urban agenda law on the celebration. Metropolis did assist since the beginning, and later the Inter-American Development Bank didn't continue his support, but CPEC, Metropolis, and UN Habitat work together. Now it's only Metropolis, I think, since I left CPEC, they didn't continue supporting the process, but Metropolis and UN Habitat are fostering this Metropolitan Day, that it became a world-class celebration all around the world. And I can tell you that I'm really happy to being part of this day, thanks to this organization of this fantastic event that you managed to set up. So that's a little short story. In case you want to remain in touch with me, you can find me in LinkedIn. That's the best way to be in touch. Also in Twitter, or you can drop me an email, of course. Thank you very much.
Gabriel, thank you. That was really a very interesting presentation, especially finding out the backstory behind the World Metropolitan Day. And I think what the takeaway for me that is really keep moving forward with your ideas. Don't give up. And I think right now we are reaping the reward, and we are grateful for you for starting that celebration. And here we are gathered together. And hopefully we can scale this up and involve the mayors and the decision makers. Yeah. Before I turn it over to some questions, let me just I think for me personally, your framework, the planification, that is very interesting. I agree with you. We have to combine really planning and action. My question is, you mentioned that from the beginning you have the Congress, the decision makers already on board. I think that's a very, very critical part of translating planning to action. In certain cases, there's a political dimension to it. There's a lot of issues. There's a lot of course, personal interest and all of those things. How were you able to address, or from your experience, what would be the best way to replicate the process that you have started or are currently espousing? Yeah.
Thank you, Mark, for the question. It's a good question. because I had the chance to replicate it already. I am working also with the government of Catamarca city. It's a city in the north of Argentina. And it's different because it's a smaller city. It's also metropolitan, but in a very different scale. It's not 15 million inhabitants. It's like 400,000 or 500,000 in total. It's really different. But the interesting thing is that every single process is different. In the first case, it was like a mandate of the law to do this update. It was also a little bit late, actually, because it should have been done before. So the empowerment of a plan was the mandate of the law. But I would say that the champion of this plan was the Secretary of Urban Development in Buenos Aires, in the case of Buenos Aires. And by hiring me, I was coming from an NGO, which is CPEC, I mentioned before. I had lots of connections. I had many connections with different, I'm also a professor at the university. So I have lots of connections with both parties, with different political parties, and that allowed me to create, let's say, the trust needed to start this development. I had also the support of the Council of the Urban Plan, the COPUA. So the COPUA is a council of 14 councillors, and I was like the coordinator of this process, but they were my peers. So we were working together. It was a very interesting process in the way of how to create leadership among the council, how all the different councillors took different issues. So it's really about the first point of the Smart City Decalogue that I presented, no? How you develop a smart ecosystem is key. And that should be really a part of the strategy. It's not just seeing maps and understanding the city. So that's the one thing. And in the other city, instead, the champion here was the mayor. The mayor wanted to have his strategic plan. He knew me before, he invited me, and he wanted to do the same methodology. But there I have to change. So the Congress, for example, in the case of Catamarca, they are working at the local, at the neighborhood plans. Why? Because the congressmen are voted by the neighborhoods. So we understood that it was more interesting to get the Congress in that axe than in the other one. You can play with that, with those roles. They didn't have a strategic council as Buenos Aires did. So what they do, they are creating it thanks to this example. So I think that in those, comparing those two cases, you can see that the method is replicable, but you have to understand where to put those players in the game, right?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting answer. This actually relates to my question. I think Akriti, feel free to shoot your question to Gabriel.
Yeah, actually, thank you so much for a very, very insightful presentation, first of all. I really liked how you presented the concept of plan and action. And my question was actually coming from an experience out of, trying to manage policies for slum redevelopments in India. Participatory planning, as you've mentioned earlier in the presentation, has been really a challenging process, even for a small, parcel of, say, just some thousands of inhabitants. So expecting it to, scale up to planning a metropolis where there are a lot of interdependencies amongst, all the different sectors and all the different organizations and people. How is it practically possible to involve direct participation from the people, because we cannot expect them to understand these interdependencies or these complications involved, which we as practitioners or planners or experts in this field understand. So I was just wanted to ask, is it practically possible to have this kind of involvement, but or is it like the involvement is in the form of our representation in the government or the institutional level representatives which we choose?
No,
Thank you, Akriti.
thank you, Akriti, for the question. It's very interesting and it's really important. The best way to involve people is by working together. No, not by doing presentations. Sometimes you need to do some presentation, and I don't know. We mixed some meetings like this, like the one we're having now, with a couple of presentations, and then we started to work on it. So could be the development of a concept, as I explained with the strategic agenda. So let's discuss climate change and how does this affect the city, or what are the problems that are linked to the rain or to the lack of water, or because people might not understand the whole dimension, no, of a very complex process, but they really are the champions of their lives, and they can tell you what are the sort of problems that they are facing day by day. So by saying so, if you have a team, actually we had a team of people working, putting the things in the, as you see in one of the charts that I shown. So a lot of people working in order to make that happen. Is when you start to develop these ideas. So there's a lot of listening involved, but also there must be an interesting case that you want to develop with them, because otherwise people won't participate. So in these three axes that I mentioned, I didn't have time to explain it in the presentation, but I can do it now. They had like different focus. The strategic agenda was more about the subjects, no? As I mentioned, how do we deal with inequality? What are the different sorts of inequalities that we have? So it was more conceptual. The second one, it was much more about projects. What are the things that our neighborhood needs? So it could be a park, an avenue, or whatever. It's more physical, right? And the third one, it's more about sectorial problems. What are the problems linked to mobility, to, I don't know, waste management, to the economic development, so tourism. So those were discussed in the third issue. Every one had its own output. The first part, the first year, we spent it in more like a diagnosis and ideas of what's going on. But in the second one, with real outcomes of real products and processes. So projects, in the case of the neighborhoods, sectorial plans in the case of the agenda, how we implement that agenda in a plan, and finally, at the metropolitan scale, we discuss a way of organization, right? A sort of entity that could help us implement all the problems that we've seen at the metropolitan scale.
Thank you. I think that's very important. A way of organization, sort of a framework, or how each of the decision makers play a role in terms of enacting a plan. And there's a question here. There's a comment I think by Oliver here. Olivier, would you like to share your point? I think it's very related also. Olivier, can you hear me? He mentions that communication is key. So you mentioned that
he's not in the room.
Okay, that's fine. He mentions that communication is key. So I think that's very important when you mention that you have connections and you have to establish trust, but at the same time you really have to work together so that you're able to practically understand what you have to do. But I think the question by Akriti earlier relates to the metropolitan level, metropolitan scale, where you're not just talking to one mayor. In the case here in the Philippines, for example, Metro Manila, we have 17 mayors, so sort of like 17 kingdoms, and just talking to one mayor is already difficult. But how do you talk to the 17 mayors? But in your case, it's really good to see how you're able to do it, and you're able to replicate it. And yeah,
But it's true what you mean. Even in Buenos Aires, for example, it was very difficult to talk to 40 mayors, and we couldn't do it. We didn't do it. As I mentioned, the Metropolitan Day was born because I never seen the 40 mayors together in my metropolitan area. That's how it started. And so the alternative to do that was working with the Congress. So we did have congressmen from the 40 municipalities participating in the process. And it's another way of creating, let's say, a way of getting to there, right? Every single metropolitan area is different because of its constituency. Will have a different relationship between mayors, right? And you have to read that and then design the process.
yes, I think that's important, especially the Congress oftentimes approves the budget. So I think that's a very strategic way of and also, of course, the World Metropolitan Day. I think that can also play a role in the process. And if there's actually another question that I wanted to ask relating to the environment. You mentioned, of course, in the beginning, you have to rethink, you have to think carbon neutral and so forth. So the thing is, in the metropolitan planning or metropolitan scale, what you're thinking really is how to optimize the economy, how to make it play its role globally, of course, nationally. So you really have to, because it plays a role entire the economic performance of a country. But how do you balance this with environment, preservation of environment? Of course, we have technologies, we have other aspects, but practically, Gabriel, from your experience, how is this done on the ground? Yeah.
I think that the environmental issue is a great opportunity for metropolitanists to jump in because it's a systemic one, right? And it's the case that is not already taken clearly by other organizations. For example, mobility, it's very much taken. And the environmental issue is not always, let's say, represented at a metropolitan scale. And it has to be metropolitan because otherwise there won't be any logic solution for the environment if we don't act systemically. And I think there's a lot of room to create stuff for that. Actually, right now we are working in the course I'm directing on understanding 3 different, for example, projects that has metropolitan scale and that are focusing on environmental issues to organize a metropolitan area of Buenos Aires. But this could be replicated in every city in Latin America and most countries of the world, because the challenges that we have for the ecological transition are huge. We need to lower the levels of emissions historically. It's something that has been never done before. So in order to do that, we have to be really organized. And we have to be organized at a metropolitan scale. So I think that there will be a lot of work for metropolitanists in the world in order to advise and to help communities and cities to become more organized in order to face the challenges that the climate change is imposing us.
Correct. I think that's a very important statement because it's quite difficult, especially if you're communicating with different mayors. For example, just one mayor supporting coal or it has a different agenda. So it disrupts the entire. Of course, it affects the surrounding areas also. Maybe my question also is, I think involving the Congress is very strategic. Would you give advice how to do that? To have the Congress be there's some political aspect agenda also on that end. Mayors working with Congress. Can you give some advice on how?
Yeah, it's really simple. I did it twice, and in both cases wasn't difficult. What you need to do first is to convince in my case, your client, which is the executive government, to include the Congress. Once that's accepted, what you need to do is to find a challenge for them, to give them responsibility, to empower them, to make them participate as hosts, not as as visitors, right? And they love it. They really like it. They do participate a lot. They want to be part of a decision process. They are not used to that. They arrive just to the debate, but they doesn't participate in the creation, and that's a very important difference. So when you offer them that, at least the 2 times that I had the chance to try it, it worked.
Thank you so much, Gabriel. I think that gives us hope. Really, this has been very interesting for me, particularly your approach. I think this is something that can really be tested in other areas, and really also appreciate you giving your time and presentation, and happy to know about the World Metropolitan and its backstory. So looking forward to discussing further with you, Gabriel. If you have any final words before we transition to the next session.
Oh, thank you so much. It was my pleasure.
Thank you so much, Gabriel. So thank you. So let's move to the next session.